This could be huge for the Boston Celtics. Bobby Marks dropped an episode on his YouTube detailing 2 potential Celtics candidates, and I brought up one more to discuss in this episode to break down 3 potential bench pieces that the Celtics could look to upgrade using the Grant Williams TPE. We'll be looking at those 3 players and their contracts, exploring how their playstyles are, and looking at how impactful they could be for this Celtics team. All of that and more on this episode of Celtics Digest. I'm Bruce Veliz. But before we dive into this Boston Celtics content, I would like to say that roughly around 80% of our viewers are not subscribed. I would greatly appreciate it if you guys hit that big old red subscribe button and join the Celtics Digest family. We just recently hit our goal of 3,000 subscribers, and we couldn't do it with the help of you guys. So if you guys want to make sure you stay up to date on daily Boston Celtics content, hit that subscribe button and get us to our new goal of 5,000 subscribers. But let's dive into the news at hand today. Make sure to grab a snack, as today is going to be a jam-packed episode as we dive into these rumors. So we'll be looking at 3 potential Celtics bench pieces. And the Boston Celtics are known around the NBA to have one of the best starting 5s, and they also have a great top 6 without Horford. They also have a nice shooter in Sam Hauser, and with Payton Pritchard's contract being a poison pill contract, it would be a little bit difficult for the Celtics to move off of him this season. So the Celtics, the only way they can realistically make upgrades is using the Grant Williams TPE, because they're not going to want to combine a bunch of their smaller guys like Lamar Stevens, Svi, and those guys to generate up to a contract of, $8 million or $11 million, or they physically won't be able to do it. They might be able to get a guy that's like $6 or $7 million, but that's not going to move the needle for the Celtics. Getting a guy with this TPE, you can bring him in for the season, you can keep him underneath long term, and he'll fit into the tax. Or what you can do is you can bring this player in that's on a 1-year deal, bring him in to kind of, win this win now thing, to win this championship, and then after this season, let that player walk to get a bigger bag. We've already discussed plenty of other players on this topic, but we'll be breaking down 3 potential guys that the Celtics could go after. First, I'd like to mention that you guys can watch this whole trade guide video on Bobby Marks' Twitter, and it is right here. So if you guys want to look into it in a little bit more detail and give me your thoughts and opinions as well. But before we dive in, like I mentioned, I want to know your guys' thoughts and opinions on these 3 guys. So leave them down in the comment section down below. But first, we'll be talking about a guy that we mentioned on Celtics Digest in the past, and that is John Konchar. Now, John Konchar not having the greatest season with the Memphis Grizzlies this year, only averaging 3.1 total points, 3.8 total rebounds, and 1.3 assists. His shooting numbers have drastically gone down from his career, shooting 36% from the field this year and 30% from 3, but shooting around 81% from the field. If we want to look at John Konchar's contract, we can also see that he's on the last year of his $2 million deal, but he signed an upcoming extension of 2 years of $18 million. So he's going to be getting paid roughly around $5 to $6 million until 2027. So for the Boston Celtics were to look into bring in a guy like John Konchar, they could obviously use the Grant Williams TPE, as they could fit that contract into there, possibly toss, a protected first or some second picks like Bobby Marks had mentioned. And this was a player that he thought the Celtics could go after. He felt that having a smaller contract, him and Payton Pritchard could kind of play that guard role for the bench role for the Boston Celtics, and they both could be, kind of a streaky shooter and nice defender. John Konchar a little bit better defender than Payton Pritchard for that Celtics team. Then if the Celtics in the offseason want to look to move off Payton Pritchard, they already got John Konchar locked up on a long-term deal. They can keep him on the Boston Celtics as their backup point guard, and they could look to move off Payton Pritchard to get a nice younger piece, or use some contracts with Payton Pritchard as he's a younger player to get, another veteran to bring onto this team. Ultimately, though, I think if the Boston Celtics were to get John Konchar, they already would have done it. They already would have used this Grant Williams TPE. He's been, even with this Memphis Grizzlies team not having, a lot of healthy players, he's still getting, slotted to the bottom of their rotation. He's not getting a lot of minutes. He hasn't had a lot of development time with this Grizzlies team. And this Grizzlies team has been banged up all season, so there's no excuse why John Konchar shouldn't be getting minutes and be playing with this team. Ultimately, he's just fallen on his role with the Grizzlies. I think he can be a nice role player on another team, but I think the Celtics kind of already have a similar player in Payton Pritchard who already kind of fills that role. And like I mentioned, I think the Celtics would have already went off and got John Konchar if they felt like he was already a necessary add to this team. He hasn't been really, playing for the Grizzlies, so he would have been readily available, and the Celtics could have pursued him already. Personally, I would rank John Konchar the 3rd likely person that I would like to receive on this potential guys that the Celtics could go after. The next guy that we're going to be looking at was not a guy that Bobby Marks mentioned, but a guy that I've been seeing on Twitter that I've been really liking a lot as a potential Celtic, and that is Nick Richards. Now, Nick Richards is obviously on the Charlotte Hornets, a struggling team in the Eastern Conference, but he is a solid big, averaging around 8.7 points, 7.6 total rebounds, 0.8 assists on 68% shooting from the field, and 76% shooting from the free throw. Now, with Nick Richards, obviously, the Charlotte Hornets have Mark Williams, who is their nice young center, who's, been averaging a double-double when healthy for this Hornets team. He's looking like a nice young piece to develop alongside Brandon Miller and LaMelo Ball. And Nick Richards has been a solid backup big for them, but doesn't really move the needle. And if the Hornets, are a bad team, might as well sell him and get some assets for him if he is a good piece. Nick Richards was, competing for the starting center last year. Then when he got hurt, Mark Williams kind of took over. Mark Williams has kind of, gotten that role this season, but Nick Richards is still a solid piece. Plenty of playoff teams are interested in him, and he could be a nice solid big for the Boston Celtics, especially with their front court depth being pretty weak. Obviously, we've seen Al Horford resting on the back-to-backs and getting a little bit older. Kristaps Porzingis, even if he isn't injured, is nurturing his injuries with a lot of care this season with the Boston Celtics to make sure he stays healthy for the playoffs. So a guy like Nick Richards could be a solid backup big. Obviously, we have Luke Kornet already on contract, and we already have Neemias Queta, who's on a two-way deal. We'll have to see if the Celtics convert him. If the Celtics do convert Neemias Queta, I don't mind them not going after Nick Richards, but if they're going to keep Neemias Queta on this, two-way contract and not bring him for the playoffs, I definitely think they should go after Nick Richards. We can also look at his contract, and as you guys can see, 3 years, $15 million. He signed that deal this year, so making $5 million this year, $5 million next year, and then the year after that is non-guaranteed money. Therefore, if the Boston Celtics were to pick him up this season, use him as their backup big this year, but next year, if Neemias Queta or Luke Kornet were to kind of pass him on that leaderboard, they could just cut him, not give him the non-guaranteed money in 2025, 2026. The Celtics would be free off that $5 million, maybe save them in the luxury tax, help them out in any other way possible if they already have a piece, kind of developing and working to that role. Honestly, I think Nick Richards could be a solid piece for the Boston Celtics for what he brings, but I don't think he's the best piece that the Celtics could go after with the Grant Williams TPE. Now, the next player that we're going to be breaking down is the last player that Bobby Marks mentioned, and a player that I didn't really think that the Boston Celtics could go after, but after thinking about this, after hearing this video, it makes a little bit more sense. And that is a guy in Naji Marshall. Now, the New Orleans Pelicans have already sold on Kira Lewis, a guy who wasn't really in their rotation, but they moved off of him in the Pascal Siakam 3-team deal to get a little bit under the tax, and they could be doing the same thing with Naji Marshall here, having a, abundance of wings and bigs in New Orleans. Obviously, Naji Marshall averaging around 7.9 points, 3.7 total rebounds, and 2 assists, 46% from the field, 38% from three, and 82% from the field. The only problem with Naji Marshall compared to Nick Richards or even John Conchar is that Naji Marshall is actually a big vital point to this New Orleans Pelicans team. And he is a, solid backup small forward or power forward for them when they need that help, especially with the injury problems with Zion Williamson and already having Trey Murphy and Herbert Jones having some injuries lingering into the season. The Pelicans might want to keep their wing depth, especially if Naji Marshall is a big piece to this team. If we want to look at Naji Marshall's contract as well, he obviously fits into this Grant Williams TPE. He's making around $1.3 million, and the Celtics should keep him as a nice, young piece to kind of develop under the ranks of Al Horford, and all that type of stuff to kind of develop, and maybe he could be a replacement for the Celtics in the future. I think Naji Marshall is a solid piece that the Celtics could look to bring. Shooting is all right, not the greatest for a Celtic, would be one of the lowers on the team, but he is a solid defender, solid rim, paint scorer as well, and I think he could be a very nice piece for this Celtics team to bring in. A nice young guy. I know that a lot of Celtics fans have wanted the Celtics to go after Jonathan Kuminga. I think that he would be too much to give up, and I think he would want a bigger role, but I think a guy like Naji Marshall, like Bobby Marks mentioned, is a little younger than Jonathan Kuminga, but he could kind of grow into that role and kind of be a nice role player or a nice piece for the Celtics team in the future as a young piece. I feel like Jonathan Kuminga would command a little bit too much of playing time, want a little bit much of the ball in his hands, and that would take away from the Celtics dynamic of giving the ball to Jayson Tatum, Jaylen Brown, and all those guys. So a guy like Naji Marshall could kind of come in and be that role guy and then kind of grow with this team. Could be a very nice piece. I really like him. A deal for him, obviously, the Celtics would probably have to throw in a protected first, maybe some seconds with the Grant Williams TPE. And like I mentioned, since he's a young guy on this young Pelicans team, the Pelicans might be reluctant to be willing to give him off of him, and that's totally fine. If I had to rank these 3 guys, I would say Najee Marshall is the first one. I would say the second one is Nick Richards, and the third one is John Carnchar, and personal rankings of how I would like the Celtics to get these guys. But let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below. Do you guys like these 3 acquisitions that the Boston Celtics can make? And thank you guys so much for tuning into this episode of Celtics Digest. We greatly appreciate you guys' support. If you guys are still at this point in the video and have not subscribed, what are you guys doing? Make sure to hit that subscribe button, as we know you enjoy the content. Thank you guys so much, and I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out.